Imagine this: a single caravan carrying the wealth of an entire city, guarded by only a handful of men. On the other side, a small group of determined believers, with barely any weapons, setting out with no idea that history's very first decisive battle was about to unfold. What started as a pursuit of a caravan would soon ignite a clash that changed the destiny of nations. How did a force so small face an enemy so powerful? And what hidden events led them to the battlefield of Badr? Stay with me till the end, because this story will take you right into the heart of one of the most extraordinary moments in history. Assalamu alaikum, dear viewers. Today we will continue our journey through the rich history of Islam. In this episode, we will learn about the story of Salman al-Farsi and his acceptance of Islam, as well as the early permission for Muslims to defend themselves, and the first expeditions and battles that took place in the time of the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him. Salman al-Farsi was originally from Persia. His birth name was Maba, and he lived in a place called Jay. Some have mentioned that he was from a village near Dam Hormuz. From a young age, he had an inclination toward religion and spirituality. Eventually, he became a servant in a fire temple, where his duty was to ensure that the fire never went out, even for a moment. But God guides those who truly seek the truth. Salman's father was a farmer and a follower of fire worship. One day, he sent Salman to oversee the family's land. On the way, Salman came across a Christian church. Curious, he entered and observed their prayers. Their way of worship deeply moved him. When he returned home, he told his father that their religion seemed better than fire worship. His father disagreed and, fearing that Salman would abandon the ancestral faith, locked him up in the house. Salman, however, managed to escape and joined a Christian caravan, traveling to the center of their faith. He lived under the guidance of their spiritual leader, but soon discovered that this man was corrupt. He encouraged people to give charity but kept the donations for himself. After his death, Salman revealed the truth to the people, who became enraged and refused to bury him. Instead, they hung his body and stoned it until it was destroyed. After him, another leader took charge. This man was sincere, devout, and humble. Salman loved him and stayed with him for some time. Before dying, the man directed Salman to another devout follower of the teachings of Jesus, who lived in Mosul. Salman went there and stayed with him until his death. Each time, as one devout man passed away, Salman was guided to another until eventually, the last one he served in Amuriya told him, "My son, I know of no one left who still follows the true teachings of Jesus. But the time has come for the final prophet to appear. He will come in Arabia, in a city with rocky ground and gardens of date palms. He will not eat charity, but he will accept gifts. Between his shoulders will be the seal of prophethood. Go to Arabia and wait for him." After his death, Salman began planning to reach Arabia. Some Arab traders arrived in Amuriya, and Salman offered them his goats and cattle in exchange for taking him along. But they betrayed him, selling him into slavery. He was eventually sold to a Jew from the tribe of Banu Qurayza in Medina. When Salman first saw Medina, he immediately recognized it as the city described by the devout Christian he had last served. Days later, the awaited moment arrived. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, migrated from Mecca to Medina. Salman carefully observed him, testing the signs that had been foretold. He presented food to see if the Prophet would eat from charity, but the Prophet refused. When Salman offered a gift, the Prophet accepted it. Finally, when Salman sat behind him, the Prophet lifted his blessed cloak, and Salman saw the seal of prophethood between his shoulders. Overwhelmed with joy, Salman accepted Islam. However, he was still enslaved. His Jewish master demanded that he plant 300 date palms and pay 40 ounces of gold to be freed. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself planted the date saplings with his blessed hands, and by God's miracle, all of them bore fruit within the same year, though normally it takes years for a palm tree to produce fruit. Later, a piece of gold the size of an egg was given to the Prophet, who handed it to Salman to pay his ransom. Though Salman doubted it would be enough, when weighed, it equaled the exact amount required. Thus, Salman al-Farsi gained his freedom and became one of the close companions of the Prophet. He later participated in the Battle of the Trench. Now we come to the permission for Muslims to fight. For 13 years in Mecca, Muslims suffered persecution, torture, and social boycott. They were beaten, burned, and even plotted against for assassination. When the Prophet, peace be upon him, migrated to Medina, the Quraysh did not stop their aggression. They threatened the Muslims, sending word that they would come to destroy them in Medina. In Medina, the Muslims now faced three groups of enemies: the Quraysh of Mecca, the Jewish tribes who secretly opposed them despite agreements, and the hypocrites who pretended to be Muslim but plotted against them from within. At this point, God gave Muslims permission to fight back. The Quran says, "Permission has been granted to those who are being fought because they have been wronged, and indeed God is capable of granting them victory." This was not war for conquest or aggression. It was to defend truth, justice, and the right to worship God freely. The Prophet, peace be upon him, organized Medina's defenses. Volunteer guards protected the city at night. Patrol groups monitored the trade routes between Mecca and Syria. The Prophet also made peace treaties with surrounding tribes, such as Banu Damra, Banu Mudlij, and Juhayna, to ensure security around Medina. But Quraysh continued their hostility. For example, their leader Qurs bin Jabir attacked Medina's pastures and stole livestock. The Prophet, peace be upon him, pursued him to the valley of Safwan, though he escaped. Later, Qurs accepted Islam and was martyred during the conquest of Mecca. Next came the series of military expeditions, known as Saraya, those without the Prophet's direct participation, and Ghazawat, those in which the Prophet himself participated. Their purpose was to protect Medina, secure trade routes, and show Quraysh that the Muslims were no longer weak. Among these early expeditions were the expedition of Hamza bin Abdul Muttalib at the seashore, where the Muslims confronted a Quraysh caravan but avoided fighting. The expedition of Ubaidah bin Harith at Rabai, where some of the first Quraysh defected and joined the Muslims. The expedition of Sa'd bin Abi Waqqas at Qarar, though the caravan escaped. The first Ghazwa led by the Prophet himself at Wadan, where he made a peace treaty with Banu Damra. The expedition of Buwat with 200 companions, though again the caravan escaped. The Ghazwa of Safwan, in pursuit of Qurs bin Jabir after his raid. The Ghazwa of Tul Ashera, where another treaty was made with Banu Mudlij. The expedition of Nakhla, where Muslims mistakenly fought during the sacred month, leading to Quranic revelation clarifying that the crimes of the Quraysh were far greater. These were the beginnings of Muslim military activity before the Great Battle of Badr. None of these were wars of aggression, they were defensive measures against ongoing hostility from Quraysh. In the previous episodes, we learned how the struggle between the disbelievers of Mecca and the Muslims had reached the battlefield. A major confrontation was about to take place, and eventually it happened. Faith and disbelief clashed for the very first time in the Battle of Badr. But before we begin the details of Badr, it is necessary to mention some important events that took place just before it. The first important event was the change of the Qibla. In Mecca, the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, used to pray between the Yemeni corner and the black stone facing towards Jerusalem, while at the same time the Kaaba would be in front of him. After migration to Medina, this was no longer possible. For 16 or 17 months, the Prophet prayed facing Jerusalem with his back towards the Kaaba. In Mecca, the Prophet had two concerns. He wanted to establish the tradition of Abraham by facing the Kaaba, but at the same time the purpose of the Qibla was to create distinction for the Muslim community. Since the idol worshippers also considered the Kaaba their direction, this distinction was not achieved. Therefore, the Prophet used to pray at the station of Abraham, which was in line with Jerusalem, so that both the Kaaba and Jerusalem would be in the same direction. In Medina, two groups lived there. The idol worshippers faced the Kaaba, while the people of the book prayed towards Jerusalem. Since Judaism and Christianity were closer to monotheism than idolatry, the Prophet prayed facing Jerusalem for about 16 months. Most of the early Muslims in Mecca were from among the idol worshippers, so this was a great test for them. Would they abandon the ancestral Qibla, the Kaaba, and turn towards Jerusalem? Or would they refuse to obey God's command? The Quran later mentions this test in Surah Baqarah, where God says that he made the former Qibla a trial to see who would follow the Prophet and who would turn back. After migration to Medina, the situation was very different. Muslims now had their own small independent state. To continue facing Jerusalem meant to give recognition to the leadership of the Jews. The Prophet also realized that the Jews would never accept Islam and even began to boast that the Muslims were following them in their direction of prayer while opposing them in religion. The Prophet's heart longed for the Kaaba to once again become the permanent Qibla of the Muslim nation. He repeatedly prayed to God for this change. One day, the Prophet was praying with his companions in the neighborhood of Banu Salamah when the command of God was revealed during the prayer itself. The Prophet immediately turned his face towards the Kaaba in the middle of the prayer, and the companions followed him. From that day, the mosque became known as the Mosque of the Two Qiblas. The exact date of this change is disputed, but it took place in the second year after migration. The second important event was the beginning of the call to prayer, known as the Adhan. At the start, there was no specific way to gather people for prayer, so they would estimate the time and come to the mosque. The Prophet was not pleased with this situation. Different suggestions were made. Some companions suggested raising a flag in the mosque, while others suggested using a horn like the Jews or a bell like the Christians. The Prophet did not approve of any of these methods. One night, Abdullah bin Zayd, a companion from the Ansar, saw a dream. In the dream, a man taught him the words of the Adhan. The next morning, he went to the Prophet and told him about the dream. The Prophet said it was a true dream from God and instructed Bilal to call the Adhan with these words because he had a louder voice. When Umar bin Khattab heard the Adhan, he came quickly and said that he had also seen the exact same dream. The Prophet thanked God for confirming it. From that day, the Adhan became the official call to prayer. The Prophet instructed Muslims to repeat the words of the Adhan after the caller and to respond with special supplications. In Medina, there were two callers to prayer, Bilal and Abdullah bin Al-Makhtum. Bilal would give the first call before dawn, while Abdullah would give the second call at true dawn. Later, for Friday prayer, the Adhan was first given when the Prophet would sit on the pulpit to deliver the sermon. During the Caliphate of Uthman, a second Adhan was added earlier to remind people to come to the mosque. The third important event was the obligation of fasting. In the last part of the month of Shaban, in the second year after migration, the verse was revealed in which God commanded fasting in the month of Ramadan. The verse said, "O you who believe, fasting has been prescribed for you as it was prescribed for those before you, so that you may attain piety." From history, we learn that fasting was not unique to the Muslim community. The followers of previous prophets also observed fasting. Adam used to fast on certain days of the month. Noah fasted after the flood. Abraham observed a full month of fasting. David used to fast every alternate day. Moses fasted for 40 days on Mount Sinai, after which the Torah was given to him. Jesus also fasted, and the Christians kept a fast for several weeks, though later they changed its form. In the beginning, Muslims had a stricter rule. If a person fell asleep after sunset without breaking the fast, he could not eat again until the next sunset. This was difficult for the people. Later, God gave the permission to eat and drink until dawn, thus making fasting easier and lifting the hardship. The fourth important event was the obligation of zakat. Zakat is the economic system of Islam that ensures care for the poor and needy. After faith and prayer, it is the third pillar of Islam. Zakat is a fixed portion of wealth that every eligible Muslim must give once a year to support the poor, the needy, and other causes defined by God. It purifies wealth, removes greed, and creates balance in society. The Quran describes 8 categories of people who are entitled to zakat. These include the poor, the needy, those employed to collect it, those whose hearts are to be reconciled, the freeing of slaves and captives, those in debt, those striving in the cause of God, and stranded travelers. Through this system, both the needs of individuals and the strength of the Muslim community are taken care of. With these important events complete, the stage was now set for the great battle that would soon take place. In the next episode, we will cover in detail the story of the Battle of Badr. The Battle of Badr was the first decisive encounter in the history of Islam. After the expedition of Abdullah bin Jahsh, the fear of the disbelievers became a reality. They now faced a clear danger. What they had once imagined as a distant possibility had now become true. They realized that the leadership of Medina was sharp and alert, carefully watching their trade routes and movements. The Muslims had proven that if they wanted, they could travel 300 miles into their territory, attack them, capture prisoners, seize wealth, and then return safely. The disbelievers understood that their trade with Syria was now under constant threat. Yet despite this, instead of choosing the path of peace and reconciliation as the tribes of Juhayna and Banu Damrah had done, they were driven further by arrogance, anger, and hostility. Their chiefs and leaders decided to act on their threats, planning to invade the homes of Muslims and wipe them out completely. This rage and enmity eventually led them to the battlefield of Badr. As for the Muslims, after the expedition of Abdullah bin Jahsh, God made fighting obligatory upon them during the month of Shaban in the second year after migration. Clear verses were revealed that commanded them to fight those who fought against them, but not to transgress limits, for God does not love those who go beyond bounds. They were commanded to fight until oppression was removed and religion was only for God. Soon after, other verses were revealed that explained the method of war, its rules, and its encouragement. God instructed the Muslims that when they faced the disbelievers in battle, they should strike firmly, capture prisoners, and then decide whether to release them out of kindness or take ransom until the war came to an end. These commands were not only instructions but also a clear sign that ultimate victory would belong to the Muslims. At the same time, God condemned those whose hearts trembled and filled with fear when the command of fighting was revealed. Their weakness was exposed, as if they were staring at death itself. This showed that only the sincere and steadfast would stand firm in the path of God. In reality, the obligation of war and the encouragement to prepare for it was perfectly suited to the situation. Even if there had been a human commander with deep understanding of military conditions, he too would have ordered his army to be ready for all emergencies. So how could the Lord of the worlds, who knows both the hidden and the open, not command such preparation? The circumstances demanded a decisive battle between truth and falsehood. The expedition of Abdullah bin Jahsh had already struck a painful blow to the pride of the disbelievers, making them restless with fury. From the context of the verses about the rules of war, it becomes clear that a bloody and decisive battle was near, and that the final victory would belong to the Muslims. God commanded the believers to drive out the disbelievers from the very place from which they themselves had been expelled. He commanded them to bind prisoners and crush the enemy until the end of the conflict. These were the words of a powerful Lord addressing a victorious army. Hidden within these commands was the promise of triumph, though it was expressed in subtle terms so that the sincerity of each believer could be tested. Around this same time, in the month of Shaban during the second year after migration, God commanded that the Qibla be changed from Jerusalem to the Kaaba. This brought a great benefit. The weak-hearted Jews and hypocrites who had entered the ranks of Muslims only to create confusion were now exposed. They separated from the Muslims and returned to their true state. In this way, the Muslim ranks were purified from traitors and deceivers. The change of Qibla also carried a deeper message. It hinted at the beginning of a new era that would not end until the Kaaba was once again in the control of the Muslims. It was unthinkable that the Qibla of a nation should remain in the hands of its enemies. If it was so, then it became necessary that one day it must be liberated. After these commands and divine signs, the enthusiasm of the Muslims increased even more. Their desire for striving in the path of God and their longing for a decisive clash with the enemy grew stronger with each passing day. The stage was being set for the great Battle of Badr. The Quraysh trade caravan and the departure of the Muslims towards Badr marked a turning point in early Islamic history. The expedition of Abdullah bin Jahsh held great importance, as it was during this event that the first killing took place, the first prisoners were captured, the first spoils of war were obtained, and for the first time the leader of an army was given the title of Commander of the Faithful. Later on, among the rightly guided caliphs, Umar was the first to be called by this title. Urwa bin Zubair narrated that the Battle of Badr and all the later conflicts with the Quraysh began because of the killing of Amr bin al-Hadrami, who was the son of Abdullah al-Hadrami. Those who were captured were also influential men. According to historical reports, the Battle of Badr and other wars between the Muslims and the disbelievers were all triggered by the killing of Amr bin Abdullah al-Hadrami. In the expeditions and campaigns that took place before Badr, there had been no plundering or bloodshed until the Quraysh themselves began it under the leadership of Qurs bin Jabir al-Fihri. Until then, the Muslim missions were defensive in nature, but the Quraysh initiated looting. The Quraysh had started preparing to attack Medina immediately after the migration. They sent a letter to Abdullah bin Jahsh, demanding that he kill Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, or else they would come and settle the matter themselves. Small Quraysh units often patrolled near Medina, and Qurs bin Jabir al-Fihri even raided the grazing lands near the city. During this time, Dur, the son of Abu Dar, was martyred. For an attack, the most essential requirement was the arrangement of war expenses. So when the Quraysh organized their trade caravan to Syria, every household in Mecca contributed to it. Not only the men but even the women, who rarely participated in business, gave whatever wealth they had. This caravan had barely set out when the killing of Amr bin Abdullah al-Hadrami occurred, inflaming the rage of the Quraysh even more. Around the same time, a false rumor spread in Mecca that the Muslims were preparing to raid the caravan. This rumor fueled the anger of Quraysh, and a storm of fury rose across Arabia. Earlier, during the expedition of Ashera, a Quraysh caravan had narrowly escaped the Prophet's grasp on its way to Syria. That same caravan was now returning from Syria to Mecca. The Prophet sent Talha bin Ubaidullah and Sa'id bin Zayd northward to gather information. They reached a place called Hura and waited there. When Abu Sufyan passed by with the caravan, they hurried back to Medina to report the news. This caravan carried immense wealth belonging to the people of Mecca. It had 1,000 camels loaded with goods worth tens of thousands of gold dinars, yet only 40 men guarded it. For the Muslims of Medina, this was a golden opportunity, while for the Quraysh, the loss of such a caravan would have been a crushing military, political, and economic blow. The Prophet announced to the Muslims that the Quraysh caravan was approaching with great wealth and called them to set out. However, he did not make departure obligatory but left it to the willingness of the people, because at that moment it was not expected that instead of the caravan, the Muslims would face the Quraysh army in a powerful clash at Badr. Many companions remained in Medina, thinking that this campaign would be similar to previous expeditions. That is why those who stayed behind were not questioned. When the Prophet set out, he was accompanied by a little over 300 men, including both emigrants and helpers from Medina. The army had not been fully prepared, nor did it have complete equipment. There were only 2 horses, belonging to Zubair bin al-Awwam and Miqdad bin al-Aswad, and about 70 camels, which were shared by 2 or 3 men at a time. 1 camel was shared by the Prophet, Ali, and Mart had bin Abi Marthad, and they took turns riding it. At first, the Prophet left Abdullah bin Al-Makhtum in charge of Medina and to lead the prayers. But when he reached Rauha, he appointed Abu Lubaba bin Abdul Mundhir to manage the city and sent him back. The army was then organized. The emigrants were placed under one banner and the helpers under another. The banner of the emigrants was given to Ali bin Abi Talib, and the banner of the helpers was given to Sa'd bin Mu'adh. The general command flag, which was white, was given to Musab bin Umair. Zubair bin al-Awwam was appointed commander of the right flank, and Miqdad bin al-Aswad was appointed commander of the left. The rear guard was placed under Qays bin Abi Sa'sa, while overall leadership and supreme command remained in the hands of the Prophet himself. The Prophet led this modest force out of Medina, taking the main road towards Mecca until they reached Rauha. From there, he turned away from the Meccan route and instead moved through side paths, reaching a place called Naziyah. Passing through the valley of Riqan between Naziyah and the valley of Safra, they descended into Safra and approached near it. From there, the Prophet sent 2 men from the tribe of Juhayna, Basis bin Amr and Adi bin Abi Azizaba, towards Badr to gather information about the Quraysh caravan.